She gave the launch order, watched his face on the monitor, and flew away without looking back. He was nothing but a contracted human bodyguard, trapped on a poisoned mining world with 40 hunters closing in on his position. Princess Kalith Vesserin told herself it was the only logical choice a future empress could make. She told herself she would grieve him quietly and move on, but when she landed on that same world 8 months later to collect what was left of him, there was no grave waiting for her. There was a wall of dead men stacked 12 feet high, and a human who had simply refused to stop breathing. The relay station's containment room reeked of scorched metal and ozone. Dorian Vale threw his weight against the blast door, forcing the emergency bolt down a half second before a rail round tore through the outer plating. Molten metal hissed against the floor grates, throwing orange light across the cramped room. He staggered back, his armor cracked open at the shoulder, the smell of burnt polymer thick in his throat. "They're through the outer wall." His voice didn't shake. It never did. He spat blood onto the floor and slammed a fresh cell into his rifle. Across the room, pressed against the wall beside the single escape capsule, sat Kalith. She was heir to a throne that governed 9 systems, and her ceremonial robes were shredded and black with soot. She wasn't shaking from the cold of the dead moon of Ashvane. She was shaking because the royal escort was gone. Her attendants were gone, and the only thing standing between her and 40 Cutter Guild killers was a hired human bodyguard nobody back home would remember by name. "How many left?" she asked. 38, maybe 40. Dorian racked the bolt on his rifle. "The guild doesn't send amateurs after royalty." Kalith's eyes drifted to the capsule. 1 seat, 1 harness. A single-occupant pod meant to fire 1 high-value passenger into the patrol lanes above. Dorian saw where she was looking. He said nothing. He just pulled a suture gun from his thigh rig and pressed it without flinching against the gash bleeding down his forearm. Click, click. "The capsule's primed," he said, moving to the console. "Straight shot through the mesosphere into the 9th Fleet's corridor. You'll be on a cruiser in under 4 hours. It only seats 1, she said quietly. He stopped typing. When he turned, his face wasn't afraid. It was just tired. The kind of tired that had nothing left to negotiate with. "I know." He walked past her to the choke point at the door, pulling demolition charges from his pack and slapping them onto the support beams. "You're the heir to a throne, Princess. I'm a man who gets paid to stand in front of things that want to kill people like you. It's not a hard equation." The bunker shuddered as something detonated in the courtyard outside. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Get in the capsule." It was the first time he'd used no title at all. Not Princess, not Your Highness, just an order. She had been trained since childhood that lives were currency. The commoners, contractors, hired guns, existed to be spent so the crown could survive. It was cold and it was rational, and in the marble halls of the palace academy it had made perfect, clean sense. Standing here, watching a man arm himself to die so she could live, the equation felt like a crime. She stepped into the capsule anyway. The harness locked around her shoulders. The glass slid shut, leaving a narrow gap. Dorian walked up and pressed his palm to the console, beginning the launch sequence. "I won't let this be forgotten," she said, tears cutting through the grime on her face. "I'll tell every system what you did here." He gave her a small, humorless smile. "Just make sure my back pay gets to my brother. He's on Earth. Denver." He hit the override. The glass sealed. She screamed his name and heard nothing. The sound dampeners swallowed it whole. Through the thick pain, she watched him turn his back to her, kick a fallen crate into position as cover, and raise his rifle toward the failing door. He didn't look back once. The capsule launched. Gravity crushed her into the seat as she was hurled into the black. Below her, the station shrank into a gray smear on a dead landscape. 2 flashes of orange bloomed near the bunker. Then nothing. She told herself she'd made the right call. She kept telling herself that until the 9th Fleet pulled her capsule aboard, and she kept telling herself that long after she stopped believing it. The Sovereign Spire rose above the capital like a blade of white stone, home to a species that had built peace on the backs of people it never had to look in the eye. Kalith sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. The medbots had erased every mark Ashvane left on her skin. She looked untouched. She felt gutted. "You made the necessary call." Chancellor Raven stood in the doorway, tall and immaculate, holding a data slate like a trophy. "The Cutter Guild's attempt failed. The Council is rallying behind you. This is a political win. 40 guild killers," she said without looking up. "They sent their best, and they failed because a human stood in the door and didn't move. The contractor performed admirably. We've authorized compensation to his listed kin, 2 million credits. His family will want for nothing. His name was Dorian. His name is irrelevant now, Highness. You are the future of this empire. He was a line item." Raven's voice softened into something meant to sound like patience. "You need to let this go. The nightmares. The Council has noticed you withdrawing." She looked at him and saw, for the first time, how little he understood. He hadn't smelled the scorched metal. He hadn't watched a man's face go flat and tired in the second before he chose to die. Months passed. She smiled at diplomats, signed trade accords, shook hands that meant nothing. But when the lights went out, she was back in that bunker, listening to the mechanical click of a suture gun, watching a broad back turn toward an army alone. The guilt didn't fade. It calcified. 8 months after Ashvane, she summoned her guard captain, a weathered veteran named Orson Cade, to a sealed briefing room. "We're going back to Ashvane," she said, sliding a star chart across the table. Cade frowned. "Respectfully, Highness, there's nothing on that rock but toxic ash. The station was overrun." "There's a body," she said. "A human. I need to bring him home. His tags, his bones, whatever's left." "If 40 guild killers breached that bunker, Highness, there's nothing left to recover. They take trophies. They burn the rest." "I don't care. We leave in 6 hours." The dropship's ramp lowered into a storm of gray ash. Ashvane looked exactly as dead as she remembered, a scarred, airless husk hanging in the void. Cade led 12 guards down into the wind. Caliph followed in an environmental suit, her visor darkening against the harsh glare. They crested the ridge above the old relay station and stopped. "Movement?" someone asked over comms. "No," Cade said slowly. "But something's wrong with the ground." Caliph pushed to the front. She stopped breathing. The courtyard wasn't a ruin, it was a monument. Craters pocked the ground, streaked with dried, glowing blue blood. And rising from the center of it all was a wall, 10 feet high, curved like a shield around the shattered bunker entrance. Not stone, not metal. Armor. Cracked chest plates, shattered visors, severed limbs, still sealed in tactical gear, stacked with a horrible, deliberate precision. A wall built from the guild's best killers, piled high enough to hold a door. Caliph's knees nearly gave out. "Weapons hot," Cade barked, sweeping his rifle across the field. "Watch for traps." They descended into a courtyard that reeked of rust and rot, even through the filters. Up close, the wall was worse. These hunters hadn't just been shot. They'd been dismantled methodically, like a man clearing a field. "Tripwire!" a guard shouted, freezing mid-step. Cade knelt beside a nearly invisible filament strung between 2 rocks, tracing it to a cluster of rigged demolition charges wired into a stripped power cell. "Military grade," Cade whispered. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing." "The guild wouldn't trap their own dead," Caliph said. "No," Cade agreed, backing away slowly. "This isn't a raid site. This is a siege position. Somebody dug in here." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Dorian!" She pushed past the guards toward the bunker entrance, stepping over a severed arm without flinching, and screamed his name into the wind. Nothing answered but static. They forced their way inside. The corridors were a slaughterhouse. More bodies, more blast scarring, more dried alien blood painted across the walls. They reached the launch chamber where she'd once boarded the capsule. The silo above was empty. The console was smashed. In the center of the room, a wall of scavenged crates ringed a mountain of spent cartridges, thousands of them catching the light like a sea of brass. On the highest crate, slumped against a support pillar, sat a figure. Caliph rushed forward before anyone could stop her. It was him. His armor was gone, replaced by pieces of stripped guild plating lashed on with tape and wire. His face was buried under dried blood and a thick, matted beard. Across his lap rested a scavenged heavy repeater, its power line jury-rigged into a battery pack pulled from the dead. His eyes were closed. He didn't move as they approached. "Cole!" She caught herself. Dorian, I'm so sorry." The repeater snapped up before Cade could raise his rifle. Dorian's eyes tore open, bloodshot, hollow, and terrifyingly awake, and the barrel came to rest square on the captain's chest. "You're late," he rasped. 12 rifles wavered, aimed at a ghost who had just outdrawn all of them. Caliph stepped between the weapon and her captain, hands raised. "Stand down, Cade, all of you, now." "Highness, he's hostile." I said, "Stand down." Slowly, the guards lowered their weapons. Dorian watched every barrel drop, tracking the movement with a strange mechanical patience. When the last rifle pointed at the floor, something in him seemed to release all at once. The repeater slipped from his grip and clattered against the crates. He slumped back against the pillar, eyes sliding shut. "Water," he muttered. Caliph tore the canteen from her suit webbing and pressed it to his cracked lips. He drank in desperate, coughing gulps. "Get medics down here," she shouted. "Now!" Cade nudged the repeater with his boot, jaw tight. He wired a raw power cell straight to the ignition chamber. One bad squeeze and this thing takes the whole room with it. "But it didn't," Caliph said, wiping grime from Dorian's cheek. He flinched from the touch. "How long has he had rations?" Cade asked, scanning the wreckage. "There were 3 days of emergency supply down here," Caliph said. "That was 8 months ago."